as the real United Airlines 175 lands. "9:37 a.m. Rogue American Airlines 77 passes over the Pentagon, and a fighter jet or cruise missile under remote control crashes into the west side. "10:06 a.m. United Airlines 93 is shot down, eliminating all innocent witnesses. This timeline accounts for many things, but like the other conspiracy theories, it has at least one major flaw. It would require a very large number of people to succeed.
For 9/11 to have been a conspiracy, we would be talking about several thousand people having to be involved. We'd be talking about people in the military, we'd be talking about people in the police, we'd be talking about people in the New York City government, people in the national government, people for the airlines, we'd be talking about relatives of some of those who were supposed to have phoned, officials at national, city and statewide, those who were responsible subsequently for intimidating other witnesses out of talking. We'd be talking about the demolition teams who were sent into the towers. We'd be talking about the people who let them into the towers in the first place, who saw them go in and decided not to give witness afterwards. Thousands and thousands of people.
So obviously the U.S. government has a long history of being involved in all kinds of shenanigans and dishonest things, but this is so far beyond the pale. This would be a conspiracy that would have to involve thousands, if not tens of thousands of people, and it involved the slaughter of 5,000 or 6,000 people, and there were just so many moving parts, and that's just not the way the conspiracies work in real life. It's too massive and too messy, and it just involves too many people for them to pull off successfully.
Award-winning author David Baldacci has made conspiracy his business. His recent best-selling series involves conspiracies at the highest levels of government. He believes his fictional stories are more plausible than these conspiracy theories.
I could build a conspiracy theory out of pretty much anything, you know. It's just the not knowing that bothers people, the not knowing absolutely. JFK was probably the most classic example of that. People don't want to believe it was one guy. And they don't want to believe it was one guy because they don't want to believe that in some ways one guy was able to do that, because that means that we were just inept.
Even in a fictional context, Baldacci believes that the more participants, the less likely a secret can be preserved.
Now, I've read a lot of the conspiracy theories about 9/11 on the internet and news, all different venues. And for me, all of them are too complicated. Conspiracies are only as strong as its weakest link. If you only have one thing that goes wrong in that chain, your co-conspirator rats you out, the whole conspiracy collapses. So not even bothering with who was behind it or what the motivation was. What are the ground forces you would need, the elements you would need to take on a 9/11 sort of situation? You need to make it simple, not complicated.
The amount of money that would have had to have been involved in planning this conspiracy, it just boggles the mind. I mean, you think about all the different people who would have had to have been on the payroll, the hijackers themselves, the people in the Air Force who allowed it to happen, the people in the press who turned a blind eye to all this, the White House officials who covered it up, the FBI people who conducted the phony investigation, the 9/11 Commission report people who conducted their phony investigation, all the members of Congress, people like me at Rolling Stone magazine who refused to investigate in order to further their careers or whatever it was. It's preposterous.
But if the logic behind a vast 9/11 conspiracy unravels under forensic scrutiny, why do so many truthers embrace it?
One of the things that I think motivates us to want conspiracy theories is that we have a huge desire for what we might call narrative, for stories. Look at the structure of the stories that we prefer. Look at the structures of fairy stories. They are made in a very kind of particular way. And conspiracy theories are fairy story realities. They are a narrative that improves upon reality itself.
You would have burned up all the fuel that was present. So you wouldn't have everything.
It is clear that people who want to believe will believe. But why?
Stop. We don't refute every detail. We refute most details.
The answer may lie as much in the past as it does in the present.
Nobody wants to feel like they were just beaten by just one person, random guy who picked up a gun and had, a vague idea of what he was going to do. He went up into the book depository building, opened the window, and blew away the President of the United States with a lucky shot. Nobody wants to believe that. It's human mentality to want to build complex scenarios to answer simple questions. And I think that was JFK, Marilyn Monroe, 9/11.
Curious.
Deborah Murray.
Raymond Joseph Metz III.
Millions of people around the world believe the truth behind 9/11 has not been told.
We have been and continue to be lied to about the events of September 11th, and that elements within the United States government and mainstream media continue to cover up the truth.
I think that is one of the reasons why an actual investigation hasn't been brought forward, because it would still be an investigative body within the jurisdiction of the United States government. There would still be a way for the investigation to be compromised. And I feel that our country, our government, and our mindset as a whole would not be where it is today without 9/11. And I don't think it's by accident, I think it's by design.
Recent history provides parallels to the 9/11 truth movement. There are 3 locations in America that mark a recent national trauma and the birthplace of a conspiracy. Pearl Harbor, Dealey Plaza, and Ground Zero. There might be a map into the dark heart of these common grounds. Author David Aaronovitch has examined from an historical perspective the rise and the rare fall of conspiracy theories.
There's a really interesting comparison to be made between the 9/11 conspiracy theory and that which was widely believed by the American right about Pearl Harbor. They believed, because they were defeated in their desire for America not to go to war by the very fact of Pearl Harbor, and they rationalized it by saying that Roosevelt had brought about Pearl Harbor on purpose. And there's something very common to that with the theory about 9/11, which is that in order to get his war in the Middle East, which for some reason he'd wanted, Bush had effectively done the same thing. He had brought about, or actually made happen, the attack on the Twin Towers. And there's almost, I feel like, a kind of perfect symmetry between the defeated anti-war people of 1940 and the defeated anti-war people of 2001. In the case of JFK, there was the suggestion that America was the kind of society that spawned people who would cut off very promising national leaders in their prime. The Lee Harvey Oswalds. One of the things that we've got to remember about both the murder of JFK and 9/11 was the enormous trauma that they caused. I mean, real psychological damage. And in the case of 9/11, that America was so hated abroad that people would want to do this to it. In a way, a kind of less traumatic explanation, in a funny sort of sense, was that there were shadowy forces at work in the government that actually were responsible for both. That explanation was slightly more tolerable than the real explanations were, that the world was an incredibly difficult place, or that there were people in American society who were deeply troubled and who had been and always were likely to cause mayhem if given the chance.
What we do is we ask questions of people who really know the answers, and we come to our own conclusions by surveying all the answers to all the questions that we asked. And I've asked dozens of structural engineers and scientists about what happened on 9/11, and the answer I uniformly get from credible sources is, overall, the story tends to be supported by the evidence.